The river beyond the city wore a skin of glass by dawn, a thin, trembling sheet that caught the first light and broke it like pale wine on a cracked cup. Even the gulls seemed ill at ease above Blackwater Bay. They did not wheel or scream. They glided in a soundless way, held taut by a stillness that made the chimneys along the fishmonger's square stop their smoke and their breath, as if the city waited a verdict. A boy with a lantern on the pier, one of the children who ran lamps for a copper and fish heads, cupped his hands and breathed into them. The breath came out white and startled him. He had never seen his breath in King's Landing, not even when rain came down sideways in winter. He wiped his nose with the back of his wrist, licked salt off the cut, and looked out toward where the bay normally coughed up waves and men cursed the tide for being itself. He had watched 1,000 mornings break over the water, pink like a bruise, yellow as egg yolk, slate blank when storms threatened. He had never seen it look like this, smoothed flat, quiet as a bitten tongue, and edged in frost as though someone had drawn a knife around the bay in the night. "Move," a man said behind him. The boy turned to see a dockhand, a great barrel of a man with a face like a wall and a furred cap too fine for him. Stolen, then, or won at dice. The man nudged the boy with his boot. "They'll want fires up by the galleys. And don't gape with your mouth open like a carp. You'll swallow the weather." The boy nodded, but he did not move right away. Beyond the docks lay Euron Greyjoy's fleet. Lean shadows anchored in neat rows, black sails furled, prows like long knives nested for killing. Between ships and city, between the red keep that clawed up out of the hill like a red-tipped thorn and the distant specks of the beacon tower, a low milky mist had wandered in. It lay like breath against the hulls, caressing them, creeping into their seams. It filmed the capstans and slid up the hawser ropes and gathered in cloth folds. The boy couldn't have said why he feared that mist. It was only air after all. But it reminded him of a cat winding round a leg, too friendly for its own good. The dockhand's boot nudged him again, and the boy started toward the piles of wood. He did not get there. A sound came out of the mist. Not loud, not even a sound he would have named. It was a shiver in the world, a trembling of glass. The ice on the river chimed. The boy lifted his head. Something tore the sky open, blue and pure as a shard of noon trapped inside a storm. For one heart's beat it looked like the spine of a fish drawn with quick ink. Then it was a maw and a torrent and a color the boy had never seen except in dreams, if he remembered the dreams at all. It wasn't fire. It was a colder thing masquerading as flame, a sound that hurt to hear, a light that seared the eyes and left them more awake than they had ever been. The first of Euron's ships lasted an instant. Planks shrank like old leather, nails blew out, men shrieked and their shrieks cut off, and the ship's spine coughed splinters before it caved. The blue tore it neatly from prow to stern and the bay swallowed it whole, and where water met the blue, ice bloomed with a lover's hunger. The boy dropped his lantern, and the lantern rolled and kept rolling and then did not roll at all, stuck on a rim of rime. "Mother!" someone whispered. Not the boy. "Mother!" Then the city began to scream. In the Red Keep, Cersei Lannister watched dawn trouble the sky with its false brightness and thought, with irritation rather than fear, that the air felt ill-bred. There had been mornings like this after she had blown the great September and the cinders from so many delicate lives had moved in the wind like misery made visible. Those mornings had tasted of ash at the back of the throat. This tasted of nothing. She turned her cup in her hands. The wine was the last of a cask she had been saving, sour cherries and a memory of sun. She did not intend to share it with anyone. Qyburn stood at the terrace's edge, wrapped in a black robe that absorbed light. Graceful, precise, he seemed to worry the air with his presence like a surgeon worried at flesh. From here the city's roofs were a red-brown crush, broken by church stubs and chimneys and the ghost of the Sept's great wound. The ragged circle of black where the stone had turned to glass and memory. Beyond that, the bay was a sheet of dull silver under a pearled mist that kept changing shape in ways that annoyed her. She did not like a thing that refused to be one thing. "What am I looking at?" she said, not as a question. "A weather not native to us, your grace," Qyburn murmured. His lips shaped the word weather with tender attention, as if the word pleased him. The ravens we sent north reported a storm that walked with the dead. It wears different skins each time, but they all fit poorly. She sipped her wine and let it sit on her tongue. The last days had been a comfortable sequence of annoyances. Euron's boasts and swagger, the Golden Company's quiet competence, Tyrion's absence like a tooth her tongue kept seeking, the knowledge of her child rolling tight within her like a pearl she had formed from grit and grief. The winter had been a rumor at the edges of the city. A cold day here, a flake of lace-soft snow that melted on her wrist. Now the rumor had arrived at her door without knocking. She did not like that either. Perhaps, she said, we should light the kitchens. If this is a show, we should have warm bread to watch it by. Qyburn's eyes flickered, and there was that little smile that told her he had found a cleverness inside himself and was stroking it with a fingertip. I'll have them lit at once, Your Grace. The bells began then, disjointed and uncertain, as if the men yanking the ropes were watching something and forgetting to pull. Cersei's spine felt the sound before her ears did, a thrum against bone. She set the sea. Up down. She did not spill the wine. Someone ran along the corridor outside, footfall, breath. Ser Gregor, mountain of a man and stillness in a suit of armor, stood an immovable statue to the right of her chair, the pale smear of his face behind the visor less human than the marble busts lining the hall. He shifted his weight infinitesimally, the faintest jingle of chain, and on another day she might have smiled. Even statues got nervous. A raven came hard and skittering onto the terrace wall. So spent it fell sideways into Qyburn's hands. He pried the ribbon free and unfurled the message. She waited. The bells stuttered into a broken clamor. She could see, distantly, men running on the city wall, little black stitches on the bastion's rough hem. It is him, Qyburn said. His voice was no more excited than when he described his catapult modifications. At least one of him, a winged one. Our scorpions can be readied on the inner walls, but their crews. He did not finish. The city answered for him. Blue light combed the mouth of the bay and drew the water into a frozen sigh. Ships buckled and split. The mist billowed upwards, thrown like a cloak by that ripping breath, and then it came down over the closest piers and smeared itself on the docks and crawled up into the streets like a thing that had learned to do it by watching a man move. Cersei did not blink. Her hand closed around the stem of her cup until her knuckles went white and beautiful. Tell the captains. The inner scorpions only, she said. Close the gates. The Golden Company on the walls. I will not have panic. The Golden Company's commander assembled his men outside the city, as ordered. Qyburn's careful tone made the words worse. It may be that they cannot reach the gates quickly. There is a press of small folk at the King's Gate already. We have not yet sounded the horns, but they understand danger better than some generals do. Then open the gate long enough to let them in, she said. If small folk die doing what they are best at, I will not grieve the loss. The small folk will die and then stand, Qyburn said with an odd delicacy. She tilted her head. That had been a choice, then. He could have said they would rise. He had chosen stand like soldiers answering a roll. Cersei felt a clean, white line of rage move through her and then away. Do something clever, she said. That's why I keep you. He bowed. Your Grace. The first whites reached the fishmonger's square as the boy with the lantern picked himself up and ran, hard and heedless, up the nearest alley. They were fast. Men who had once been sailors, knives in their belts and rope burns on their palms, now moved like dogs off the leash. Many wore frost on eyes and lips. Some were still wet from the bay and left skids of ice where they set their feet. A woman with a fish basket smashed one over the head with her basket, because that's what she had, and the fish flesh squirmed out and skidded away over the ice. He turned his head almost politely to look at her, and the woman saw her reflection in his eyes, tiny and crisp and wrong. When his hands closed on her, her husband ran without meaning to. After 20 paces, he remembered the basket and the way her hair had fallen out of its bun. He stumbled to a stop, swore once, and turned around. He had no weapon. He had his hands. He hit the thing that had been her with his hands. When he fell, the boy with the lantern was still running. On the road up to Aegon's high hill, panic moved in waves that met other waves and poured around corners and found new shapes and, when it could not find a shape, crashed into itself. The king's gate was shut. No horn warned or welcomed, only bells and shouts and the first clang of emergency scorpions being cranked. Above, the red keep stones looked unfriendly and clean. There was still no snow. That would come later. First came ice in the lungs and a thin film on the paving stones that made feet go out from under you at the worst possible moment. Outside the walls, Harry Strickland rallied the Golden Company. He was not a man to be rattled by weather or the knowledge that he had been sold to a queen whose face did not know doubt. He brought the standard up and let it lean against his shoulder and looked at the long city wall with a cool appreciation for Stone's advantages. He had argued against encamping outside. He had been overruled with a smile that tasted of iron. There was no time for what-ifs. He lifted his hand, and elephants would have answered if there had been elephants. Men answered instead. Pike lines reformed. Archers put their feet to the right notch, held breath, drew, waited for targets that moved like smoke. He had fought men who believed they could not die and men who had been told they were gods. He had not yet fought men who did not know they had died. He placed himself where he could best be shot and called orders in an unshaken voice. It steadied other men to hear a voice that did not shout. When the first of the dead came through the farmer's field in its brittle silence, Strickland realized that what he had taken for mist was a presence with weight. It carried a cold that laid a hand on the back of his neck and pressed there. The dead's eyes were coins in the face of a statue. You could not bribe those coins. He adjusted his grip. The volley took the first rank apart. In any honest fight, that volley would have made a shape in the other army's mind. Caution, a pause where courage had been. Here it made a shape in flesh only. They stumbled and crawled on their bellies. Others climbed over them. It was like fighting the sea. He had done that too, once, strapped to a mast, spitting blood and laughing to make the wind think less of him. He did not laugh now. "Pikes," he said. "Stand." They stood. The first collision was as sweet and solid as a hammer striking home. It did not stay sweet. They pushed, and the dead pushed back with a stew. Pitidity that had a logic of its own. When a pikeman went down, he often did not get up again. When he did, his eyes were wrong. Strickland knew how to retreat and keep his shape while he did it. He calculated his line, found that the numbers wanted him to fall back to the King's Gate, and broke a tiny rule within himself by cursing. He had trained his men for 10 years to be the kind of men who did not look behind them. Now he looked behind him. The gate was a dark mouth. Small folk battered at it. There was no music of bolts being loosed and bars raised. Strickland reminded himself he did not believe in gods. He believed in math. The sum said they would not make the gate. He chose a different sum. He lifted his hand again. A horn blew above the King's Gate. A captain on the wall had known when to disobey. The bars in the gate mouth ground. The doors lurched inward. For a moment the crowd surged forward, and men were crushed. And then the gate widened by an inch, and then 2, and then a man's breadth. And it was enough to make a wound. Strickland took that wound and made it larger. He fed his men through it in a disciplined ribbon that did not tear. He did not run. He walked fast. The dead ran. The first of them hit the door while it was still moving. The iron-bound planks jumped. The captain on the wall threw all his scorpions into the delta of meat squeezing through, and it was a good thought, but scorpion bolts were poor spells. The dead learned to move around them, to slide under the machine's limbs, to fall on the crews and make them unwilling recruits. By the time the inner gate closed, Strickland had half his men inside and half his men forming a horseshoe around a city that had decided to save itself at a dear price. He swallowed. He set his spear. He looked up, briefly, beyond the press of faces, toward the Red Keep. He did not expect to see a queen at a wall. He did not. He saw instead a bird-shaped absence in the sky. A wound in the morning where the cold shone through. Viserion turned his long head and looked at King's Landing. He herded the storm before him, pulled it with slow strokes of his wings, and the air made knife noises around him. His blue light licked the top of the great gate towers and made stone whimper. Men on the inner wall fired and reloaded and fired again. A bolt grazed his wing and flashed away into the river like an insolent fly. When he opened his mouth, the city found out that fire could devour fire. The scorpions were not built for what came out of that mouth. From above, the red stone of the keep had a beauty that told the truth about the men who had made it and the cruelty that those men had needed to finish it. The blue cut across that red and laid its color on every face that looked up. Qyburn's fingers tightened around the railing until he felt the stone ripple under him. He had made many things that lived after they should not. He had not made this. Wildfire? Cersei said, very calmly, as if she were dictating a note to a maidservant. Where there are stores left, where there are men with brains to set it off, light it along the outer ring. Not the inner. I want a wall of fire between them and the alleys that lead to me. And send for Euron Greyjoy. I want to hear him swagger now. They will burn, Qyburn said, not arguing, merely naming the future as if that made it less like the present. The poor, they will die if they run as well, she said. And then they will rise. If they burn, perhaps they will not. Light it. He did not bow this time. He left with the efficiency of a knife being wiped clean. The wildfire was old, and in the dark it dreamed green dreams. Cellars that had not been opened since Aerys' day held it like a grudge. Men with flints and trembling hands struck sparks into slow fuses and sprinted between barrels like mice between cats. In the cobbled arteries near the fishmonger's square, where the alleyways narrowed and the air smelled of eelskin and piss, a patch of air caught fire. It did not roar. It unfolded. The green came up like a sheet being snapped over a bed, took a breath and spread. It caught men and fish and ropes and the pretty glaze on an old woman's jug. It leaped down into the workmen's gutters and across to the legs of a donkey whose fright lettered the street and then stopped. Wildfire cared little for the reasons of its masters. It burned what it could find, and what it could find was plentiful. The dead ran into it without slowing. They burned and kept running, and some of them fell, and their fellows ran over them, and some made it through and left marks of eerie green flame on the stones where their feet had been. Men who had just been alive burned without understanding. The boy with the lantern felt heat on his scalp and ducked, and his hair crisped on the ends. He rolled beneath a cart and put his cheek to the cold cobble and wished for his mother in a small, practical way. And while he lay there, he watched two cats, one alive and one dead, discover each other on two sides of a rope and argue the only way their bodies understood. When he finally crawled out, the boy took the alley that smelled of leather and made for the hill and its promise of stone. Above all of this, Viserion wheeled and bled light. His rider did not cry out. The Night King did not have a voice that men recognized. He had a purpose that did not need sound. He looked at the Red Keep and at the cold fire eating the city's lip and at the bands of life that would feed him once they had stopped moving. He did not smile. He had forgotten how and why. He had not forgotten Bran Stark. The pull toward the north was an ache that had no body. It was not impulse that had brought him south. It was arithmetic. The city was coin. At Winterfell, the ravens beat at the roof of the hall until the sound from their wings was like the patter of impatient rain. Bran Stark sat not quite comfortably in his chair with its wheel, and wooden arms, and watched through 1,000 eyes while his own eyes looked at the fire. He watched a boy with a lantern survive a thing that should have taken him. He watched the blue rip a fleet apart like thread. He watched green answer blue. He watched a woman who was dangerous as a razor sit still and maintain an illusion of calm by force of will. He watched all of it until he found the part that mattered. "He is taking a city," he said, and his voice was the voice of a boy and an old man at once. "Not because he wants it, because he will make it want him after." Silence took the hall. The room had been full of murmurs and clinks. The small sounds before battle when men told themselves they were brave enough and women remembered how to breathe when their brothers lied. The silence felt like something had laid a cold hand over the mouth of the world. Sansa's throat moved and then stilled. She had learned to mine cold from warmth, to cut truth from lies, and to say no with a smile so gentle that the man she declined thanked her for it. She looked at the fire because she would not look at Jon, not right away. "How many?" she asked, as if she were asking what a cask of grain would fetch. How many will there be, if he gets what he wants? Bran's eyes flickered. As many as lived there last night, he said. And as many as try to leave today. Jon Snow pushed himself up out of his chair too quickly, the motion betraying his weariness like a drawn blade shows its nicks. He had not slept properly since they had begun gathering the parts of an impossible plan. He could no longer tell what was tiredness and what was the knowledge that he had been dead once and come back, and the world had not adjusted to that. It had only kept asking him for more. "We go," he said. The "we" was a sled he meant to load with everything he loved and drag across impossible ice. He did not mean all of them. He meant what he could carry. Daenerys Targaryen looked at him with eyes that had learned to be a queen's but had not forgotten the color they had been before the world gave her that job. She had been angry since dawn, a clean anger like a sword washed in a river and wiped dry. King's Landing was the city that had been promised to her with coups and lies and prophecies, then handed to other men who put their boots on it. She had chosen to fight for the living first, because that was what a queen did if she meant to be loved. The Night King had made a liar of her planning. She felt used. She felt something else too. The rough tug toward King's Landing that you felt when you had once been starved, and a door whose latch was a kindness, a door whose hinge was a cruelty. He had a knack for discovering which would hold a particular man's weight. There was no door in a blizzard. There was the blizzard. He thought of Cersei and the child she claimed to carry. He thought of a city he had betrayed and saved and betrayed. He thought of the dragon pit and what it could hold. "You'll need bait," he said, softly enough that only those near him heard. "If you want him south. If he's gone there to gather, you have to keep him where that matters." Bran did not smile. "I have been bait before," he said. "He will come." Sansa turned her head sharply. "No." "I'll go," Bran said. In the same tone a man might say, "I'll fetch more wood." "He wants memory and the thing that holds it together. He will follow me wherever I am." "You are my brother," she said, and the vowels were sharp with northern weather. "You are a Stark of Winterfell. I will not send you to that city to die so that no one else does?" Bran's face did not move. It had not moved much since he had come back from beyond the wall with silence in his pockets. "If he raises that city, the dead will look like your father and your mother and everyone who ever fed a child at a market stall. He will take their faces. He will come here with them. If I go to the dragon pit and sit there, he will come there." The dragon pit. Tyrion rubbed his lip with one finger, thinking. "We know it. It is open ground. It has tunnels. There is old fire beneath it." He glanced briefly at Davos, who shrugged in that eloquent way men from the sea have when asked about land. "It is, at least, not full of small folk." "If we do this," Jon said, "we do it now." Daenerys looked at the boy who had once been a bastard and now had a name that tasted of ash in her mouth and sweetness she refused to crave on her tongue. She looked at the boy who had brought her dragons out of fear and into necessity. "We fly," she said. "We do not wait for the army. We fly with Bran and whoever has Valyrian steel and the sense to keep him alive until the rest can ride." "You cannot put a boy in a saddle on a dragon," Sansa said, as if practicalities could rescue her heart from this argument. "He cannot hold." "I have tied myself to trees," Bran said, and for a moment he was a child again in the whisper of it. "You can strap me to a beast." Arya had been sitting in shadow. She had been a shadow since childhood, really. A girl who had done what she must and then learned to do it with skill, and the skill had made her powerful, and now she had to be careful not to love the power too dearly. She had been picking at the haft of a dagger with her thumbnail, prying up a splinter and pressing it back down, listening to men speak about moving her brother like he was a board on a Syvas table. "I'll go," she said. "I'll ride with Jon. He owes me a ride." Sansa's head snapped. "No." Arya's face softened, very briefly. "I know the city better than any of you. I can move through. I can pull small knots apart. You take a dragon to the sky. I'll take the alleys. I'll bring whomever I can into the pit and shut doors behind me. And if I see her," she added, with a blade's gleam of teeth that wasn't quite a smile, We can find out if Cersei Lannister dies like other people die. Tyrion's head came up. Arya, she will not be our war, Jon said, and his voice had a steel in it that went deeper than command. Not today. Then you'll be glad if I can go and keep her from mistaking our fight for hers. Arya's tone was light. She was telling the truth and being cruel with it at the same time, because sometimes cruelty was the only way to be heard. You can try to tell me no. You can also waste time we don't have. Sansa closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were older. Take the dagger, she said. If you must be foolish, be a successful fool. After that, speed became the only god anyone had time to worship. Bran was tied into a harness Davos had surreptitiously kept aboard a ship for exactly this sort of indecent miracle. Ropes were fastened through buckles that had once held cargo safe on the narrow sea, and were now meant to hold a Stark boy to a dragon's spine. The dragons were saddled with hands that had learned how fast their beasts could rip a man apart with a thought. Those hands did not shake. Rhaegal blew steam and tossed his head and bumped Jon with it like an impatient horse demanding more difficult work. Drogon measured the courtyard like a king who knew his throne would have to be picked up and carried into a war. The air was so cold that the men's sweat felt like knives. Don't fall, Jon told Arya, and she grinned at him, sharp and young. Then you'll have to keep me, she said, and hooked her arms around him in a hug that looked like a fall from a distance and felt to him like the purest thing he had left. She climbed up behind him, the small practiced grace of someone who had vaulted walls all her life. Brienne watched them mount without blinking. Jaime, beside her, had his good hand on Widow's Wail and the unwelcome thought that he had never looked less like a knight than he did right now, with a wooden brace strapped to the stump of his sword arm and a face the North wouldn't spit on. He caught her eye. I should go. You should not, Brienne said. Her voice did not rise. It had the calm of someone watching a cliff recognize itself after an earthquake. You swore to fight for the living. There are more of them here than in King's Landing. You don't know that by this afternoon there won't be more there. He smiled, crooked and rueful. I killed a king to save that city once. It would be grotesque to die up here while it burns again. You didn't kill him to save a city, Brienne said. You killed him to save people. The city is bricks and stories. The people, she stopped. He kissed her cheek, briefly, and made it look like thanks. I'm going, he said. He did not ask permission from Jon. He did not ask Daenerys. He found Tyrion, and the two men looked at each other over all of the things they had already not said. Tyrion nodded one small nod that meant at least two things. Jaime swung up behind Her Majesty like a scandal and did not care. Men muttered. The Queen did not. Hold, she told him dry, and do not tell me where to go. The dragons launched like storm gods, and the yard's air came apart around them. Sansa watched them go with a piece of herself pulled out and braided into their tails. When they were small as birds, black and green with a spot of white like a child's toy tied to one. She turned to Yohn Royce and to the cast of men who had become the frame her world hung from. Send ravens for every milehouse between here and the neck, she said. We will move what we can move. If King's Landing stands when the Night King falls, we do not wish our numbers to be offered to her in a bowl. Arya did not look down during the first hour. The sky above the north was a white lid. The air knifed. Her teeth hurt. She had loved the idea of dragons as a child, the way you love the idea of a thing that proves a story was once true. Riding one had nothing to do with pride. It was hanging onto a storm with your knees while your brother talked to the wind with his hands. The line of the world shifted beneath them as landscape became river, road, divide. Bran lay against the harness with his eyes closed. Sometimes he said a word that had belonged to someone else's throat long ago, and Arya felt a curl of her child belly twist because it still frightened her to hear dead men's voices ride in her brother. Jon's shoulders were taut under her arms, and she tried not to think about falling. When they cut south of the neck, the air tasted wrong. It felt like someone had left a door open to a winter that had no home. By the time the spires of the Red Keep rose in the distance, smoke and cold had married and birthed a child. It shrouded the city. The pillars of green fire had subsided into a low smolder as deliberate as spite. Blue lightning ran through the clouds like nerves, and the dragons felt it before the riders did. Rhaegal bucked. Drogon roared, and his voice filled the air like a cathedral of bone. The third cry was not a cry. It was a refusal, and it split the sky with blue. Viserion came out of the cloud with his eyes lit like lamps in a frozen church. He banked, and things on the ground moved in ways that had nothing to do with them and everything to do with him. Rhaegal twisted to meet him, and Jon felt the old, clean calculus of war open in his chest. He did not look down. He kept his eyes on the wound coming toward him and told his body to remember how to move out of the way of an arrow that traveled sideways. Drogon and Daenerys climbed, Rhaegal and Jon Dove. Viserion scissored between them, and the world turned on 3 axes, and for a moment Arya felt like she was hanging over nothing at all and that her body had forgot. 10 the shape of ground and would never learn it again. She bared her teeth to the wind and reached for a dagger she could not throw at that size of a target. The dragon's breath tore the air in 3 colors: red, greenish gold, and the indecent blue, and where they met the air screamed. Men below covered their ears. Some of those men were alive. Drogon cut across Viserion's face and left a welt of soot and pain. Viserion rolled like a broken wheel and steadied himself on the wind with an ugly grace. Jon saw the angle a heartbeat too late and hauled his body and Rhaegal's with him across the empty. The blue passed close enough to bleach the hair on Arya's wrists. She smelled something that could only be death trying out a new taste. Rhaegal screamed in injury, and Jon's body answered with a sound he did not shape. Daenerys saw the blue and saw the angle and knew what it would do and did not slow. Drogon slowed for no one but her. She had learned more than patience from her dragons. She had learned how to carry a fury that did not burn its bearer. She took Drogon higher and made Viserion lift his head to look. She cut across him with fire that would char the stone of the Red Keep's watchtowers and make the gargoyles weep melted stone tears. Viserion took the flame on his breast. It ate him, and he did not fall. Qyburn scorpions, placed on the inner walls and the terraces of the keep, worked relentlessly. Crews reloaded with hands blistered by cold they could not explain. Some bolts hit. Most did not. One separated Viserion's ear, and the dragon barely noticed. Another nicked Drogon's tail and made him furious. Fury helped. He came down like night and flung the boy with the lantern's entire street into light that drove back blue for a breath. The boy saw the dragon and thought, quite reasonably, that a god had come. Then the god was gone, and the alley was full again. This time with men who were alive and had followed a child with a face like an unslept night through a maze of ropes and old meat to reach a big circle of broken stone at the top of a hill. Arya had jumped when Rhaegal banked and slid briefly sideways. She had jumped because the leap took her to a terrace crenellation and then to another and then down to a roof that had once held pigeons and now held dead men. She hit with her knees bent, rolled, came up, ran. She left Jon with his dragon and with her brother, and a part of her had expected him to reach back and catch her by the hair like he had done when they were children and she had climbed too high on the walls. He did not. He had a sky to fight. She ran, and the city stung her tongue with old smoke and new fear. Twice she had to slip past a knot of dead because they had learned to stand shoulder to shoulder in ways a living man becomes ashamed of. Once she slid under a white's legs and came up behind it and drove her Valyrian dagger through the base of its skull. Frayed like cloth meeting a blade. Twice she called to living men in narrow ways. This way, follow me if you want every step you take not to become someone else's forever. By the time she reached the path to the dragon pit, she had 6 behind her, then 12. A baker's wife, one of the gold cloaks with blood on his lip and none on his blade. A boy not much older than the child with the lantern who carried a proper sword in the wrong grip. A septa with ashes in her hair from a church that was not there anymore, and more besides. A city was a person. It moved poorly and beautifully. It did not give up. In the dragon pit the air felt lean. The ruin had a way of judging those who entered it. The pit had been fed dragons once. It remembered the shapes of their bodies like a bed remembers love and absence. Arya had never seen it under snow. She saw it now. The dust in the pit had changed clothes and lay down in white. Her breath made a ghost of her. There was a quick cry up in the stands. and she turned and put her hand up and saw that it was not a wight. It was a man whose face knew Tyrion Lannister's, and he fell to his knees rather than try to earn another laugh. "Not now," she said, and he got up. The 12 behind her became 20, then 30. Doors opened from side vaults. Some held men with crossbows who barely knew the string from the bow. She tied 2 ropes to heavy stone rings and made them into gates. She had learned to set traps in a place far darker than this, where the scent of a room told you if someone had died in it and the wood remembered the names of those deaths. She had not expected to use those lessons to protect men who had never said please and thank you to the likes of her. It did not matter. She set the trap. It was always the same trap. Take a big thing and make it small. Take a moving thing and convince it to become still. She heard them before she saw them. Jon's dragon's cry, Drogon's metal welter of sound, a music of wings, then bodies in the sky. Daenerys brought Drogon down on the hill outside the pit and felt the dragon's heart under her thighs, steady and ready. Jaime slid against her back and bit down on a curse. She put her feet to the stone and looked around. The dragon pit's curve seemed to wait, tensed. "We have to hold him," she said. "We have to keep him exactly here." "How?" Jaime asked. And then Bran Stark's wooden chair appeared at the top of the stair with Tyrion shoving it hard while Davos cursed at the steepness like the stairs had wronged his mother. Jon came down the other side with a limp in his step that he no longer attended to. He carried Longclaw in his hand and soot on his face and an idea in his eyes which made Daenerys' heart lift despite itself. "Old fire sits under this hill," Jon said. "Tell me where." Tyrion swallowed. He had led his queen through the bowels of this hill once. He had been a younger fool then, with faith that his family could be made to love him if he proved clever enough to be useful. "Under the western vault, and the low, are east, where King Maegor hid a stock he forgot to tell his pyromancers about." "Qyburn," Jaime said, and there was a split second before his mouth could catch up to stop saying that name like it belonged to him. "If we give Cersei a reason to live beyond pride, she will not fight us setting that fire," he said finally, and only the smallest twist lifted the last word. "Send someone to ask her for it. Ask for everything." "I'll go," Tyrion said. Daenerys opened her mouth and he stopped her with an open hand. A gesture she would not later forgive, but for the moment it was useful. "There is one person who can talk on both sides of this line," he said. "If I cannot get it, at least you will not have to waste a dragon on the keep." Davos, hopelessly practical, had already begun to ask men to haul stones in a line that would be a circle if you squinted. "We'll mark it," he said. "Gate him in when you're ready to light it. You'll have to fly over the walls to bring him where you want him. You'll have to dance," he added, looking at Drogon's shoulders and at Jon's face. "You any good at dancing?" "He is," Daenerys said. She heard the faith in her voice and sighed internally. "So be it." Tyrion made for the keep, stepping over a body that was not yet dead and had been given the courtesy of time. He went by the alleys Arya had declared safe. He chose doors that led to doors. Twice he smiled at men who would have cut him for his boots, and men who had planned to do exactly that found themselves unable to cut a man who smiled like he had once been their friend and had brought food. He reached the lower yard of the Red Keep without meeting a wight. He met a different animal. Red cloaks stepped forward with their halberds crossed and a willingness to stab a dwarf if that was what the morning required. He took a breath to tell them something careful and true, and the yard's high door opened and Qyburn stood there like an answer to a riddle. "Ah," the old man murmured, "so there are still habits that put men in places." He looked, very briefly, as if he might enjoy stroking Tyrion's hair and taking a sample of it. Then his eyes sharpened. "Your sister will see you," he said, "under certain circumstances, which you will obey because if you do not we will both die much sooner than we had planned." "You have a plan for that too?" Tyrion said, following him in under the arch where the stone tried to pretend it had not been warmed by wildfire. "I have a plan for everything," Qyburn replied. "I am still surprised when any of them work." In the Queen's solar, Cersei did not stand. She would not give him that gift. She watched him come in with her chin lifted half an inch, which said habit and contempt and a sliver of surprised relief. She looked more beautiful to him than she had ever looked. It is often this way with women who break your heart. Each fresh wound makes their faces clearer. "Tyrion," she said, "do you come to kneel or to burn us both with a cleverness?" "Neither," he said, and found his breath for it. "I come to ask for what only you have left to give. Wildfire. Every cask. Every fuse. The city must burn in a ring, or the city will not be anything but a grave that walks. If we set a pen of fire at the dragon pit and keep him there, we can end him." "And then I have been useful," she said drily. "You always did prefer me as a tool." "I prefer you as alive," he said, and the words surprised him with their simplicity. "I prefer the child you carry to be alive. Other arguments are secondary, and you know that. If you do not, perhaps you never were the woman I thought you were." This was dangerous, and he was wrong to throw it like a knife. But sometimes knives went where they were needed. The line of her mouth changed by half a shadow. Qyburn said nothing for once. The mountain's helmet shifted in a way that meant breath. "I give you wildfire," she said, as if she were giving him good bread from her table, curious to see if he would choke on it. "Because I will not be conquered by a beast that does not understand itself. Because my city will not become a larder for a thing that does not get hungry." "Send Gregor," Qyburn murmured, the words careful, "to lead the wagons." She turned her head very slightly. "If you wish, you'd give me your own monster," Tyrion said, dry as winter grass. "How can I refuse so fine a gift? He can carry the barrels like toys. He can practice not letting them fall." "She is not giving you him," Qyburn corrected. "She is giving you a leash and expecting you to think it is a gift. Walk." They walked. None of them pretended trust. They made a procession of enemies. A queen's disgraced brother, a queen's physician, a queen's reanimated champion, and the barrels that had tumbled kingdoms. The Red Keep's throat swallowed them, coughing up doors. The dark where dragon skulls had once woken nightmares, storerooms where wine had been quiet for 50 years and would never be drunk now. The long, low cellars where air tasted of green and old singe. They loaded. They moved. The city watched them with the sides of its eyes. On Aegon's high hill, under the open sky, Bran Stark breathed the white breath of men and the black breath of ravens. They came and went from him. He closed his eyes and opened 100. He followed the Night King's thoughts like a man follows a scent in a wind. He let the wind turn him. Jon stood near him, not touching the chair but feeling as if he were holding it aloft. Sansa's fear had been correct. It felt like betrayal to let a boy become bait. It felt like a road becoming a bridge after you had stepped out onto it and discovered there was nothing under your foot. He had done worse things in the name of saving what could be saved. He told himself that and did not like himself for how easily the lie fit. "Here," Davos said. He set the first barrel with a grunt that involved his whole body. "We'll lay them under the stands. We'll three. Diffuse around like a bride's ribbon." He glanced up the slope to where the Red Keep loomed. "If they light us from there, we'll see it coming. They have no reason to fire on us," Jaime said, steady as someone who knew better. "Leave me 2 men on each fuse. If I tell you to cut it, cut it." "You have a plan to cut Wildfire," Davos said mildly. "That will be a pretty turn. It will be necessary if she decides at the last that she would rather kill us than let us have her part in this victory," Jaime said. He did not look up at the keep when he spoke. "Trust me," Davos snorted. "I've done worse." The first wagons appeared at the edge of the hill, dragging their weight like pennants. The mountain and the men with him looked like a new breed of mule, mindless and very strong. Tyrion hurried from one to the next, convincing men without words that yes, they should put this thing down where that girl with the wolf's face told them to put it and not where the old habit told them was safe. Arya met him with a glance that acknowledged both his usefulness and his uselessness. He ran on. He had always been more effective when he was not watching himself working. The sun slipped, the cold lifted and then doubled. Snow began to fall. A soft, thin heiress that would have been pretty on a bed. It settled in Bran's hair like a promise made by a liar. It lay on Drogon's wings like dust. The first of the dead came up the broad road to the pit. They did not hurry. They did not need to. They had learned from fire and been made cunning by ice. They came 20 abreast, the front rank men still wearing the colors of the gold cloaks under the frost that lacquered them. Behind them came the others. It was a wide road. The dead fit. Jon took his place. He had not yet spoken to Daenerys. He had not needed to. They each had the same dance written under their skin now. Drogon leaped into the sky and cut a line of fire down the road. Jon and Rhaegal flanked. The dead moved into the gaps the fire could not hold as water moves into hollow ground. They climbed the low walls near the pit and broke themselves against the first barrels of wildfire. The men on the fuses flinched and held. Davos walked the line and slapped one man none too gently on the back of the head when he saw that man's nerve think about getting up and leaving. "Later," he told him. "You can be afraid later." Arya moved the living the way a woman moves cloth through a needle's eye. She took knots of people and found the long way between two dangers. She drew their fear into her hands and let it go like a breath. She slid under the stands and came out where men needed a knife in the dark more than they needed prayer. Somewhere inside her, a girl held her father's hand outside the hand's tourney and had more curiosity than sense. That girl turned her head for a heartbeat and looked toward the keep like a bird looking toward a higher branch where it might be quiet. She saw a figure at the parapet, hooded. It was a trick of falling snow and tired eyes, but for a heartbeat Arya thought she saw Sansa's profile. She blinked. The snow erased it. "Now!" Jon shouted. He had seen the blue in the cloud gather itself into a single ruthless intent. Viserion came down like midnight. Drogon went up to meet him. The air was a cage and a wheel and a knife. The two were all flame and wing and sound, and between them, like a bead on a string, hung a figure that did not need to hold on because the air held him. The Night King's spear took shape in his hand. A simple thing, a tool, like a farmer's hoe. Simplicity made it terrible. Jon drew Rhaegal in hard. "Left," he muttered, and Rhaegal understood. Jon stood in his stirrups and screamed defiance simply to feel it run through his throat. Viserion's head turned. Jon saw the angle and knew what it was. He threw himself flat, but the spear was not for him. It went past clean as a thought. Drogon lurched. Daenerys' body took the shock and yielded and held. The spear had not found heart. It had nicked a wing and made the world briefly cruel with wind. Viserion came again in a wide circle, and the blue in his throat rose with hideous ease. "Bring him," Daenerys yelled, and took Drogon down into the ring they had made. She flew low, an affront to caution. She lit the near line of fuse with a breath. The green ran around like a vicious little dog and then flung itself into being. The first wall of fire rose. It did not stop the dead who were already inside the circle, but it made a boundary. The Night King did not seem to mind boundaries. He stepped over 100 in a breath. Bran opened his eyes. They were in there, the men who had been crows and the tree that had been a man and the world that had been a memory. He lifted his chin. He felt the Night King feel him. The dead flowed into the pit like water poured into a bowl. Jon and Daenerys had to keep moving to keep from drowning in what could not drown. Drogon struck, Rhaegal struck, men with dragonglass struck, and still they kept on. And if not for the circles of green that burned to their very bones, they would have kept on forever. A captain of the City Watch who had decided to be a better man after the wildling girl he had loved had mocked him once with wicked kindness, found a way to stand on higher stone, and fired a crossbow into a White Walker's eye at an impossible angle. The walker shattered like ice left in sun. A dozen whites around him fell down like puppets whose strings had been cut, allowing a dozen living men to breathe again. For a heartbeat, the living had more than they had had before. Kept happening. The dead kept coming. Tyrion watched the scene not as a strategist now, but as a man who had used up all his thought and had only all left. He had not drunk in hours. It did not occur to him to do so. He stood by a fuse with a knife in his hand and thought about what his father would have said if he had seen him now. He could not decide if the ghost of that man would have been contemptuous or touched. He could not decide which would have enraged him more. Jaime moved wherever the line bent. He had become very good at watching a line bend. He had learned it in the Riverlands and at Riverrun and before walls that would not love him. He saw where the dead were finding a door and stepped there with his sword. And when his sword was not enough, he put his shoulder to a man and made him straighten. He did not think about his sister. He did not think about Brienne. He thought about Holding. It was strange how Holding could become the only thing a man knew. And then the air changed. It shifted like a beast in sleep deciding to wake. The snow's pattern altered, as if a hand had passed over the world and smoothed it. Those who had fought in the north felt it. A man from the rills put his hand to his heart. A woman from Last Hearth whispered something that might have been a prayer. The Night King stepped into the pit with the unremarkable grace of a man stepping through a door. He did not look at Jon first. He did not look at Daenerys. He looked at Bran Stark as if at long last a story had returned to the place where it belonged. He moved toward the chair. The air drew breath. Jon began to run. Daenerys began to rise. Drogon and Rhaegal turned their heads like hounds scenting a hare. The White Walkers near the Night King lifted spears. The Whites, all those poor shivering bodies, moved like a single living muscle around the core of their desire. Arya was already moving. She had been still on a balconied lip of stone that overlooked the center of the pit. She had found the quiet in herself that the kindly man had taught her to carve out with a knife and keep under her tongue. She had thought, briefly, of moving through the crowd wearing a different face and getting close that way. She had realized with relief that there was no time for cleverness. There was only speed and angle and the gift of a tiny grace from a god who might make her a coin in his pocket if she did this one thing well. She ran along the lip. She sprang. For a moment she was nothing at all. No name, no family, no cold little list she touched in the dark to comfort herself that she would make the world pay for what it had taken. She was body and will and the memory of a dance with a man who had made her chase cats until she could catch them. She came down silent as snow behind a White Walker, stabbed it through the neck so that it came apart into diamond dust, and kept running. Men saw a shadow pass. The Night King turned his head a fraction. His spear tilted minutely, not toward Jon, not toward Daenerys, toward that tiny interruption in the shape of perfect inevitability. Arya leaped. The Night King's hand closed around her throat with a simplicity that had killed kings. He lifted her with a frightening lack of effort. His eyes were everything cold can be when it has given up pretending to be gentle. Her feet kicked once and did not find ground. Her hands closed against his, small and fierce and very alive. She looked into the absence in him and saw nothing there to name. The dagger she held in her right hand slipped free. She let it fall. The Night King's head turned imperceptibly to follow the line of that fall. A curiosity only, not a mistake. Arya's left hand caught the falling knife. She drove it into the place where his ribs would have been if he were a man. She drove it with all the gift called anger that the gods had accidentally put into her on the day she was born while they were looking somewhere else. She drove it and felt it meet and then not meet anything at all. For a heartbeat there was resistance like old bark. Then there was none. The noise the Night King made was not a cry. It was the sound of a thought deciding it had been wrong for a very long time. The light went out in his eyes. The cold in the air stepped backward, as if embarrassed. He let go of Arya's throat without violence, and she dropped and caught herself with a cat's ugly grace because she had learned to fall in bravos and in alleys and off horses and into grief. She rolled, came up coughing, and saw the world's strangest rain. The dead were falling. They were not dying. They were unbecoming. A man who had been about to sink his teeth into a living woman's cheek shattered like glass with a hammer. A White Walker spear went from a threat to a stick to dust. A knot of whites near the northern gate went down like a reef hit by a wave. Viserion, in the sky, gave a dreadful, beautiful shudder, and the blue that had been in him went out like an eye closing. He fell. Drogon banked hard. Rhaegal screamed. Daenerys and Jon turned their faces into the wind and let it sting them like applause and farewell. Viserion hit the Red Keep's high tower and came apart in a long, terrible sprawl. Stones slid and broke. A gargoyle leaped and made no sound. Qyburn, on the wall, closed his eyes and put his hand to his breastbone. Not in grief but in astonishment at physics. Cersei stood on her terrace and held her breath and thought of her children, and of the night air the day she had burned a temple, and of her father's eyes, and of a boy who had leaped into the air, and found it did not hold you up the way you believed. She did not weep. In the pit, Arya stood with the dagger smoking faintly in her hand. Bran turned his head and looked at her with a tenderness that moved across his face like weather on a lake. "You were fast," he said, and his voice was the voice of a boy again for a heartbeat. Jon ran to Arya and lifted her bodily off the ground and had the breath to laugh once. A cracked, unhandsome bark that was nonetheless a true joy. Daenerys landed Drogon within the circle of still-burning wildfire, and the green light made her hair something else's color. She slid down and stood and looked at Arya and nodded once. A queen's acknowledgement of a thing that had been done that could not be undone and had saved them all. Around them the city was quiet in a new way. A hush fell that was not fear. It was exhaustion. Men leaned against stone. Women sat down where they stood. Some laughed, high and wrong. Some wept without sound. The wildfire's light blew sideways and licked the stands like a pet disappointed by its master's new preoccupation. Davos began the work of stamping fuses out and smothering flames, as if he had done nothing else with his life. Tyrion leaned against a stone and closed his eyes, and for the first time in hours felt the presence of his own hands and feet. He remembered suddenly and keenly wine. He did not move to find it. Then came the next thing, as it always does. The living remembered themselves. The Red Keep stood. The queen in it had not died. Men looked up and saw her silhouette. Men remembered which banners had fed them and which had cut their fathers' heads off. Wildfire still sat under the city like a number waiting to be used in a sum. Cersei descended. She did not keep men before her. She came with Qyburn and with one rank of red cloaks who looked ready to kill and ready to die and unable to decide which they preferred. She stood at the edge of the dragon pit. She could see the circle of char, the ring of it, its tidy murderer's perfection. She could see her brother standing beside a man she had decided to hate the day she had first seen him, both of them stained and smoky. She could see the girl with the wolf's face and the dagger and the queen with the dragon, and she came down a step and then another. "We are not friends," she said. It was the most honest sentence she had spoken in days. "You do not own me because your girl killed a nightmare. You do not own me because the air is warmer. You do not own me at all." "No," Daenerys said. Her voice was tired but kept its iron line. "No one owns you. But you will not use fire again against the living. Not in this city. Not anywhere." Cersei tilted her head. "How could I? I have given you all I had." Tyrion watched her mouth carefully. "Not all," he said. "Never all." She looked at him then as if he were a dog that had learned to speak. The city behind her stirred. Somewhere a woman began to sing. A raw, sweet sound that had as much to do with pain as with joy. It set the hair up on the arms of every man who remembered being a child. The queen's face did not move. "Leave my city," she said to Daenerys. "Take your dragons and your cold boy and your north and leave. We will bury our dead." "They will not rise," Bran said, and the matter-of-factness in his tone was less than a mercy. "But the city will not forget. It will grieve. It will burn from the inside for a while," he added. And if he had known how to be cruel, maybe he would have wished he hadn't said it. "I do not care what a cripple tells me my city will do," Cersei snapped, turning on that voice like a hawk turning on a mouse. "I care what my city is. It is mine." Arya's hand had not left her dagger. She made herself put it down, slide it home, turn step by step away from the impulse to finish this day by finishing this woman. She did not because Jon's hand was on her shoulder in a way that was not force, and because a part of her, the part that had once loved watching the markets with her sister, wanted to see what would happen if the game stopped for a breath. Daenerys looked at the city. She looked at the Red Keep, the place she had been promised and had been taught to want like a fruit taken from a tree that was her right. She looked at the people in the pit, alive and staring at her because she had come down from the sky and had not left. She thought of how quickly fire ate rope. She thought of a boy who had tried to reach for a spear and had died in her arms 3 winters ago in a place where the wind had knives in it. She thought of bells and what they meant and what they did not. "We will leave," she said at last, surprising Tyrion and her own heart in the same breath. "We will leave when we have buried the people the dead did not allow you to bury. We will leave after we have taken the barrels back under the hill where they belong, and if we find more we will take more. We will leave when the living can walk through the city without stepping over a stranger every 10 feet. When we go, we will speak again." Cersei's eyes were very clear. "And then you and I will decide if there is a way to live in a world that has seen what we have seen," Daenerys said. "Or if we must fight it again." The woman on the parapet thought of her father, who had loved making men say please for what they already had in their hands, and she hated the feeling that tugged at her ribs. It was part fear, part envy, part a less nameable thing. "Take your barrels," she said, with a hand that flicked away a fly that did not exist. "I will not waste men protecting the things that nearly killed them." They went about the work. Men who had been on different sides 10 minutes before lifted bodies together. Arya found the boy with the lantern asleep under a cart with his arms around his head. She pulled him out and pressed a heel of bread into his hand she had stolen from someone's table as she ran by. He did not say thank you. He bit and the crumbs fell like snow. Drogon and Rhaegal lay on the hill like mounds left by a tide, working breath in and out and watching with the ancient patience of things that have seen their world change shapes and then learned to pretend they do not care. Euron Greyjoy surfaced from whatever rotten hole he had slithered into when the blue had struck his ships, and he came to the pit with a stagger that managed to keep looking like swagger. "Well," he announced to no one in particular, "what a morning." He grinned at Daenerys, who did not give him a glance, then at Cersei, who gave him a look that could have made a better man ash. He laughed. "I've sailed in storms," he said to Tyrion. "This was a storm that sailed em." "Eh? You've never sailed anything," Tyrion replied absently. "You've merely been in places you did not deserve to be and survived by being too stupid to die." Euron made a pleased face as if that had been a compliment. "And yet here we both are," he said. He wandered off toward a cask he had no business opening. The mountain moved once, and Euron thought about his life and chose a different cask to lay a greasy hand on. Night came down with the particular speed it has after snow. The city made little sounds of its own. The living separated from the dead into the shapes they had been before noon. Men went home changed. Some would pretend in the morning that nothing essential had shifted. Some would never come out of their houses again. Some would love gods with new names. Some would forget badly. Arya slept sitting up for an hour and dreamed that she was running uphill and the hill kept becoming steeper, and when she reached the top there was no top. She woke with the sour taste of fear in her mouth and reached for the dagger's hilt without thinking. It was there. Her hand, which had killed kings and butchers alike, shook a little. She looked down at the fingers. They looked like anybody's fingers. It soothed her and then annoyed her to be soothed by something so stupid and true. Jon sat with Bran and the snow and did not move. He had needed to move for days on end. Stillness was so alien to him now that it made him ache for its pity. He watched Arya asleep and then awake and did not say her name. He looked at the pit and the ring of scorched stone and thought of the place where he had held a girl he loved while the world tore itself a new hole. He stood and walked because he could not do anything else when his own mind made the room smaller. He found Daenerys standing with her hand on Drogon's flank, under the wing's shelter. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" She did not turn. "For not burning her," he said. The pronoun did not need a name. It wore one the moment she heard him speak it. "For not burning the city." She was quiet. Snow made its slow needlework on her shoulders. "If I had," she said finally, "I would have told myself it was because the Night King had left me no choice. I would have believed it. It would not have been true. There is always a choice until there is not. He taught me that," she added to her annoyance. "He narrowed the world for me. I don't forgive him for that." "You killed him," Jon said, and his mouth made something like a smile. "Your girl killed him. The world got wider again. For how long?" It wasn't a question. It was too honest to be one. "She will not yield, Cersei. She will take what this day gave her and make it a new way to breathe. She will look at these bodies and tell herself she saved them. She will look at me and think of razors. She might surprise you, Jon offered. She might. And then, because she was held up by honesty or by a failure of caution, she added, you might surprise me again too. Jaime climbed a stair he had climbed as a boy when he had not been allowed to bring his sword, only his eyes. He found the place with the best view and the worst wind and stood there, and his jaw went numb. He looked at the red keep he had loved and hated, at the city he had burned from the inside, once without fire. He thought, quite uninvited, of Brienne's back when she had ridden away from him once, and of the way she had turned back. He thought of his daughter's hair. And then he heard footsteps and turned and saw a woman who had once been the only truth he understood. You jumped on a dragon, Cersei said. Her voice had in it a rare note, true surprise. It wasn't so hard, he said, and laughed once, because lying was so easy in her presence that it felt like a relief. You will go with her, she said. It was not question. With the dragon woman. You will be her sword, and your father will rise from his grave very proud of you for having finally learned how to kneel. My father wanted a son who could not kneel but could do what he was told, Jaime said. He got neither. He got me. She looked not at his face but at his hand. Less of you. It makes the rest sharper, he said. He waited. He did not know if he wanted her to ask him to stay or to tell him to go. Go, she said. Get out of my city while I do something that will make you ashamed or proud or both. We will call it even. He nodded once. We have never been even, he said, and it was less accusation than a fact spoken aloud to feel its shape. He went down the stair and left the place where he had first felt certain he would be loved forever. He did not look back. He had learned that trick late and well. Dawn found the city and tried to be kind without seeming to. The river's skin had cracked in the night and lay now in shards at the mouth of the bay like broken glassware. The gulls remembered themselves and began again the old complaining song that was really a praise of life. Smoke rose where it must and did not where it didn't. Men carried bodies to a long line of trenches. Women carried bread. There was more bread than there had any right to be, because fear made wives bake and lovers steal, and now both gave what they had thought to hoard. In the pit, the last of the fuses were lifted and coiled with gentleness into baskets that Davos swore at and Qyburn admired. Bran asked for a thing and was given it. Qyburn watched the boy's pale fingers touch the old stone of the pit and felt an unease for which he had no name. We must inventory the old stores, he told no one in particular. We must do it while we can still count. Tyrion found wine. He did not drink it as if it were a friend. He drank it as if it were medicine and he a patient in need of something bitter. He walked the hill and the ruined streets and listened to the new conversations. A mother telling a child that no, the dead would not come back if she left a plate of bread on the door. Step. An old man swearing he had seen a dragon cry. A boy telling the story of a girl who had flown like a bird and stuck ice itself with a needle. He memorized the lines of the stories because he knew from experience that they would become the truth soon, and it would be useful to remember the moment before it cooked. By midday, the dragons took the sky again. They pulled south, then north, gathering the smell of winter and the knowledge of the road like scarves. Arya went with Jon, because neither of them had anything to say to Cersei Lannister that could not be said better with silence. Daenerys did not look back a second time. Tyrion looked back constantly and could not stop. Below, Cersei stood on her high place and watched them go with an expression that had in it not a trace of the old mockery she had used to keep herself from being broken. She looked like a woman who had just discovered that the house she had spent her life building stood on a certain sort of soil. She put her hand on her belly. The world will not end on my watch, she told the child who might have been there, might not. It will change its mind. When the dragons were little as sleeping flies, Qyburn said, Your Grace, with your permission, I would bury the rest. He meant the wildfire. He meant more than the wildfire. Do what you must, she said. Always, Qyburn, you do what you must. In the north, the ravens that had gone south returned with a flight that looked like a storm's edge. They told the courtyards and the godswood and the stones of the wall what had happened. Sansa stood where she could see the far line the sky made with the world and separated her relief from her grief into neat piles. It was not hard work. It was only work. When Jon came down off the dragon with Arya's hair in his mouth and Bran's gaze at his back, she went to them in a way that was neither fast nor slow. She put her hand on her brother's shoulder and left it there exactly 3 heartbeats, and then took it away. "Tell me," she said, and they did. It took the living 5 days to do what the dead would have done in 1. Gather, plan, sharpen, air. Sansa sent food south in carts with wheels that squealed, not to King's Landing, never to King's Landing, but to the camps where men from the Riverlands and the Reach had begun to gather, confused by raven stories and by their lordlings' sudden lack of appetite for fighting each other when there were no more blue eyes in the trees. News arrived the way a river crosses rocks. It stuttered and sang. It was not neat. Men told one another different versions of the same truth and were not troubled by the difference. Jaime went with Daenerys' party until the neck. There he turned, not because he had changed his mind about duty, but because a man riding north on a horse with a tired face had recognized him and had told him something which turned duty into love. "There is a road that goes left off the old Waystone," the man had said. "It leads to a village that used to be 3 houses and a forge. It is 5 now. There is a woman there who asked me if I saw a man with gold hair and a missing hand and a puzzling conscience, to tell him she had bread." Jaime had laughed and thought it a jest and then realized who the woman had to be. Brienne looked at him when he told her he would go. She did not smile. She did not smile. She said, "Bring her bread." He said, "I will," and meant for once just that and nothing else. On the 7th day, the camps in the Riverlands heard horn calls that meant friends. The men gathered into ranks that were ugly and honest. They looked like farmers with swords and knights with dirt on their faces. The queen came down out of the sky again, and she did not look like a storm this time. She looked like a woman who had learned a thing about power, how easily it can be applied badly, how little you gain by applying it for its own sake. Jon rode at her side. Tyrion was behind them, and beside him Arya, who had discovered she could ride a dragon and be neither proud nor ashamed of it. Bran came on a horse. He had asked for that. He had asked because he had seen it and because men were tired of being asked to watch a child not walk. When the banners of the North and the Vale and the Riverlands met banners from the Reach and the Stormlands and the wayward remnants of a Lannister host that had decided to put down its pride for a week, it looked for a moment like a story with a happy waistline. A message came from King's Landing tied to a raven's thin leg. Said only, "We are alive." Underneath, a second line had been written by a different hand. Said, "For now." Tyrion read it and smiled with such a complicated sorrow that for a moment he felt tall. He looked toward the south because habit and heart demanded it and saw, in a mind's eye that had gotten too good at building cities, the red keep on its hill and a woman standing on a terrace with her hand on a belly and a clever man at her shoulder and a monster in her shadow. He felt, briefly, the strange thing that had touched them all in the dragon pit. Loss so absolute it had weirdly given them breath. It would not last. He knew it. He drank to it anyway. There in the daytime, surrounded by men who had chosen, inexplicably and unsteadily, to wait to kill each other until tomorrow. At night, the wind bent through the camp with a warmer hand. The men slept and did not see the things that had almost come for them if one girl had jumped an instant later. The gods, old, new, wood, fire, coin, sat in their places and argued about nothing. The dragons dreamed as beasts dream, of wind under them and of the small quick pulse of prey and of the bigger, more dangerous pulse of the thing that could carry them to a mountain and then over it. The world did not end. That was the miracle and the insult. In the morning, Jon Snow woke and looked at the sky and knew 2 things at once. That the war with the dead was over. That the OT, her war, had only begun to breathe again. He stood and stretched and found Arya at the camp's edge staring at the road that led in 2 directions at once. "Which?" she said, not looking at him. "Do we bleed for next?" "The one that leaves more people standing," he said, because that was all he had ever been able to say and keep himself intact. She snorted. "Standing," she said, and did not make it a question. Her mouth bent in the shape of a smile that could break your heart if you had loved her as a child and could scare a king if you had not. Sansa will like that. Sansa will make it into law, Jon said, and realized as he said it that he had no idea what that law would be, and that the not knowing did not frighten him. The world had grown bigger, could hold surprises again, could hold grief too. He made his peace with both in that breath. From the south, where a city licked its wounds and learned to count again, a breeze came up smelling faintly of green apples and ash. It moved Jon's hair and Arya's too. It went on past their camp and into the trees where ravens were recounting and where the quiet deer lay down in the knowledge that one kind of howling had stopped. The wind did nothing important. It only touched everything and went on, as winds do, ignorant and kind. On the terrace of the Red Keep, Cersei watched the sky. She was tired of it. It held too many answers she had not chosen and too much blue. She turned away and clapped her hands once. Somewhere deep in the castle, a bell rang once in reply. "We will rebuild," she said to Qyburn. "Yes," he said. He did not ask from which end one begins such a thing. He simply nodded and thought, with the pale interest of a man whose mind preferred clean problems, of where the mortar would come from and how to persuade men who had survived death to climb scaffolds. The mountain stood behind them, motionless as if sleep had at last remembered him. "We will bury the rest," she added, and the word rest held the dead and the green barrels and 1,000 old stories. "We will forget what it felt like to be afraid." Qyburn did not correct her. He did not point out that forgetting fear is how you prepare the bed for its return. He bowed and walked away to do what must be done, counting under his breath. Cersei remained where she was, a woman with the morning at her back. She laid a hand on her belly and pressed in gently as if testing dough, and for once the touch had nothing to do with seduction or with power. It had to do with a small, practical thing. Life, the petty and irresistible insistence of it, the way it keeps turning up in wrong seasons and old rooms, in cities that have been almost stolen by winter and given back like a toy a child grew bored with. The bells did not ring again. The gulls wheeled and complained. Blackwater Bay mended its surface and chose, with famous stubbornness, to look like water. A pair of children raced along the char-burnt rim of the dragon pit and scolded each other in voices that belonged to a world that remained. In the camps to the north, men woke and asked each other if they had dreamt a girl leaping, a knife shining like a bit of moon. Each man said he had. Each man lied a little about how high she jumped, how bright it had been. They made her larger. They made her less human, because it is easier to love the impossible than the likely. Arya would have smiled if she had heard them. She did not hear. She washed her face in a basin and did not look into the water long. She had no use for mirrors unless they were windows and led elsewhere. The day warmed like a child reluctant to leave a bed. Men opened carts and counted loaves. Women scolded chickens into quiet. Somewhere a smith hammered on something he had been meaning to fix for 3 years. Above all of it, the sky held its cold blue and did not apologize for what had passed through it or for what would. The living, as always, forgave the sky its indifference. It is hard to sustain anger against something so beautiful and so mindless. Jon and Daenerys stood together at the camp's edge and said nothing until they did. "South," she said. "South," he said. "Not to burn." "No," he said. "Not to burn. To make a different kind of ring," she said unexpectedly. "Not of fire, of promises." He looked at her. "You trust her to keep them?" "I trust us to keep ours," she said. "We cannot do more than that and remain ourselves." He considered that, found it heavy, found it true. They turned their faces toward the line where road met horizon. It was a clean line. It would not be for long. The world dislikes neatness, prefers snarls. They would learn to comb it again. They would not always do it kindly. They would do it because that was the work, now that the cold had taught them how quickly work can end and leave a world behind to remember it. They walked toward the horses. Behind them, Arya picked up her pack without letting it thump and went after them because there were still names on her list, and some of those names were not people anymore but ideas, and those you never finish. Tyrion found his mount and climbed up with a grunt and a curse and a blessing, all at once. Davos swung into his saddle like a man who knew the sea would never forgive him for choosing a road. Bran watched them go and saw 1,000 roads superimposed. like scratches on a pane of glass, each leading to a different brightness and a different dark. He smiled. It was very small, and no one saw it but himself. In King's Landing, the boy with the lantern, now with his fingers bandaged where they had blistered, walked past a pile of timber and saw a mouse gnawing a crumb of bread with an enthusiasm that put kings to shame. He laughed once, a bubble of sound that hated to be alone and so found another bubble like it in a nearby throat, and then there were two boys laughing, and that was how cities live after horror. Not with speeches, not always with remembering, with the stupid noises children make when the world forgets to kill them for a minute. Far to the north, snow fell in a place where no one had a name for it because no one was there. Fell just the same, careless as grace. The world, for the moment, moved toward spring not because it had earned it but because that was what came next. The dead had been taught their last lesson by a girl who had decided the world would be better if it kept going. It did not thank her, kept going anyway. That is the only kind of thanks worth living for.